This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Zia and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. Speaking of the union, Jay, I have been slacking because we had 2 new union members join recently, and I didn't mention it at the immediate time that they joined. I need to welcome Jeff Loney and Paul Dudley. I think Jeff was with us before and then rejoined. I'm not sure, but that sounds correct in my mind. And welcome Paul as well. They've joined us in the last month or so. And I had so many emails that they went to the bottom of my email list, and then I just cleared out all my emails before winter break. So welcome Paul and Jeff. Hope you found the Discord and are enjoying that and all the other polls and whatnot. And since this, Jay, is our final episode of the year, we're going to talk about the year, and we're going to do so with our friend Chip Midnight's back. Hey Chip.
Hello, good evening.
Chip, you've become an integral part of this whole apparatus we call Dig Me Out, providing interviews with a variety of folks and being part of our Discord community. I wanted to talk about the interviews at some point, but do you have, I know it's hard, they're all your children, but do you have a favorite interview this year?
That's a great question. So first, before I reveal what that is, I will say that I came into this year all guns a-blazing, and I plan on doing an interview for Dig Me Out every 2 weeks or so. I fell a little bit behind. There are, as you know, obviously, because you've reviewed 630 albums, there's a lot of artists out there waiting to be interviewed. I fell off a little bit, but I think I got about 10 in this year.
Mm-hmm.
So some of them were with bands and artists that I know, that I've interviewed in the past. Some are with artists that I have been a fan of for many years. I think, though, the one that really sticks out to me was with Adam Elk from the Mommy Heads. And the reason it sticks out is because I was vaguely familiar with the Mommy Heads back in the 90s. I think I owned the Geffen CD probably at some point when I got an email was it early this year? I think it was early this year that they were re-releasing some stuff from the 90s. So I thought that would be a great way to introduce myself to the band and also then to knock out an interview. Adam was a phenomenal person to talk to, one of those guys that we hit it off very quickly, and so much so that they put a new record out later this year, and I did a feature on them, a second interview with Adam for Big Takeover magazine that is on newsstands probably right now, if not now, very, very soon. But that one really sticks out just because we've developed this, this back and forth email friendship. And he sent me, I don't have it right handy, he sent me a package that had every Mommy Head CD. He's been reissuing them. They're just coming in the cardboard sleeves and not a full.
Mm-hmm.
So he sent me 12 Mommy Head CDs and a Mommy Head's coffee mug, and it still would have been memorable had he not sent me that stuff. But just a really great guy.
Awesome.
So for the artists that you, I know you've talked to several folks that, it wasn't the first time you interviewed them. You had mentioned you had talked to him or had conversations or had done a full interview at some point in the 90s or in the past, and then we're reconnecting. How are those conversations different to you? Like the feel, the tone, the topics?
Yeah, it's interesting.
The time.
Yeah, because the 3 that I can think of off the top of my head that I have interviewed in the past that I also interviewed for Dig Me Out were Art from Everclear, Heather Doobie, and Jeremy Toback.
Mm-hmm.
Art was a phone interview. It was in between World of Noise and Sparkle and Fade when I interviewed him. At the time, I was I was essentially like a newspaper reporter trying to get information about the tour. And so, I don't expect him to remember me by any means. So that one felt kind of fresh. I was able to kind of drop into the interview that like, hey, I've interviewed you before and I've talked to you, but I don't expect him to remember that. Heather Doobie sort of dropped out of sight for many years. So it was, I do remember having a conversation with her in the 90s, probably 99. And she was just sort of getting started with her Sub Pop career, which didn't last all that long. But, I think that interview was in 1999 was memorable. So it was cool just to be able to find out what this person's been doing the last 20 plus years. And then Jeremy, I mean, that was a 2-hour interview and we could have talked for 4 hours. He was somebody that, and I explained it in the interview, that I had emailed out of the blue just because I found his email address, his AOL email address. So that I don't want to say it was like catching up with an old friend, but it was sort of like catching up with a high school or a college, maybe a college roommate from the 90s that you haven't talked to in forever. So it felt like catching up with him. I felt like I've been following his career. I don't know that he's been following my career at all, but it was cool to catch up. And I think, Jeremy especially looked back on the 90s and was able to look at it with kind of a newer perspective and see some of the things that he did right, some of the things he did wrong, and some of the things that he would have done differently, and some of the label problems that he had and all that kind of stuff. And so, I thought it was really interesting to have that perspective many years later, that when I interviewed him in 1997, he had just signed to a label. He was touring and going to be on the Lollapalooza side stage. So he wasn't able to see into the future and how all that would play out.
Right. Do you prefer to, or you find it more challenging to interview bands that have like a long history versus, I know you also interview a lot of new bands that are just up and start.
So I will admit, like, some of these bands that I've been interviewing this year are bands that, and you guys have probably talked about it on the podcast before, that I was a fan of in the 90s that I dropped out and stopped paying attention to them. And, I talked to the guys from Zebrahead who, I knew some of their singles and I knew one album that I had, or one CD that I had in the 90s. Had no idea that they were still around. And they're like, oh yeah, we've been touring. We played Japan. We're big in Europe. And so it is, I always feel a little bit guilty that I haven't followed them. So when I'm interviewing them, I'm like, so let's talk about the 2000s. I'm like, yeah, we've been touring nonstop. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I had no idea. So I do feel a little bit like I haven't done all my homework, or I haven't kept up with some of those bands. So it is a little bit more of a challenge, but I think that everybody I talked to this year, I think, was happy that people still care.
Awesome. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Jay, did you have a particular interview that stuck out? One that you enjoyed the most?
Well, obviously the Jeremy Toback interview for me was huge. That was a little surreal because I didn't think, I'm a huge Brad fan. Just that era of Brad and Satchel, and even his solo album was just so burned into my memory. It just takes me back every time I hear those songs. And so I think both just getting to the depth that you got with him, I just never thought I would hear an interview with somebody from that band that was able to really fill in a lot of the questions I had, because there was a little mystique about that band, that the way that, at least around this origin of it, and sort of why it wasn't bigger. And I don't think Stone Gossard talks about it a ton, even though they've been active on and off through the years. So it was really cool to kind of get that behind this curtain look about how that band came together, how in the world he ended up with those guys, sort of the business side of things. I'm always love hearing that. Just makes it super real.
History
and just perspective that you don't normally get. Certainly not a perspective they would have talked about at the time, but 30 years later, it's fair game. And I thought the Miljenko Matahavich, how do you say his name? Steelheart interview was actually really cool too. I didn't expect to learn as much as I did. But just getting his backstory, how long they struggled to make it, how that eventually happened, and then that crazy incident with him falling off the lighting truss, or the lighting truss falling on him. I had totally forgotten about. So that just um well, again, was like a puzzle piece of like whatever happened to that band, and why do bands like that just disappear? It really helped
Mhm.
bring that all together and complete the story. So
And it
I
really
thought both of those were awesome.
it really shows that breadth of 90s from the beginning to the end. We're talking like early 90s was I've read recently where like Sebastian Bach and Eddie Trunk, maybe, like, people really hate the term, or Ricky Rockman really hate the term hair metal, so I'm not going to
Yeah.
call it hair metal, but the end of the glam metal, the pop metal, whatever you want to call that
Yep.
early 90s stuff, and then talking to like Zebrahead and Jeremy, and such a different, like, totally different world those guys were all
Yep.
in. Oh, the other one I forgot to mention was the Chad Fisher interview, which you know he was a lot more behind the scenes than I realized, with a lot of projects, being Colin Hayes drummer and working with Colin Hay, and he worked with Jeremy Toback, and he had a lot of connections that I had only seen his name on the back of a CD and had no idea that he had as many connections and was involved with so much stuff as he was. That one was a cool one too.
I agree. That one, the Toback interview, obviously, with like Jason, that was huge because of just the love of that, of Brad and those albums and his solo record. And um you mentioned the Adam from the Mommy Heads. I mean, that was a band that I did not know of other than their name. I'd like heard the name, but I had no idea what they sounded like. And so being completely introduced to a new band and getting to hear his story was really cool. Um, and I also liked, because of where it fell in the timeline, the art interview was interesting as well, because with it being the 30th anniversary of World of Noise, that was a record that I remember being like, this is weird, but I like it when it came out, and hearing Fire Maple Song the first time and being like, oh, this is weird. This is not like what I'm hearing of all the other bands do, like with big drop D songs and stuff like that back then. So
A little shout out to Phil on the Discord group, who posted a picture today that said, I would appreciate the CD selection that he had. He was holding up, or he had a picture of Brad, the Shame CD, and the first Babylon AD CD. And I just want to let Phil know that as soon as I saw that picture, I fired off an email to Derek Davis, lead singer of Babylon AD. So fingers crossed, we'll get a Babylon AD interview.
Bang go the
2023.
bells.
Bang go the bells.
you heard it here
RoboCop
first.
soundtrack. So we'll see what happens. I don't know. We'll see
Cool.
if he responds to me.
Oh boy.
That's
Well,
awesome.
yes. We also did, as we do every year, we had some roundtables. Not as many as previous years. We were there were a couple months where we just had so many reviews to do and the polls and whatnot that we weren't able to do a roundtable every month, but we did do a number of them, and they were all fun. Jay, I don't know if you have a favorite. Maybe you want to pick one or two, but I just want to mention I really liked the Manchester one, because I didn't really understand that it was more than just a scene. It was a whole genre. It's like multiple things. In the same way that like Desert Rock is like, it's a scene, it's a genre of music, it's like a lifestyle, it's a look, it's a attitude, like it's a whole thing. So it was interesting to learn about that and the bands. Love talking about Dinosaur Jr. That was a lot of fun. And then the Garage Rock, Eric Peterson bringing the knowledge on that was a lot of fun. And I've definitely been like checking out more of the Garage Rock that I was not familiar. I was familiar with some, but very small amount. So that was the one that I liked. What were your picks that you enjoyed this year?
Garage rock in the revival, or in the 90s, was a lot of fun. Eric was incredible. He's like an encyclopedia for that genre and all the subgenres below it. And it was a chance for me to nerd out on some of the action rock stuff that's related to the garage rock stuff. So I got to feel a little bit like an expert, but also just fanboy out and get to talk with Eric on some bands that he and I both like a lot. Um, I also enjoyed The Cure in the 90s and Dinosaur Jr. in the 80s episodes because it gave me a chance to just go back and spend time with both of those bands' catalogs for decades that I hadn't listened to a ton of The Cure in the 90s.
Right, same.
And even though I'm a huge Dinosaur Jr. fan, I honestly hadn't listened to a lot of their 80s output. I was more focused on 90s forward. So it's just a good excuse to go in and just add those records to my library and spend some time with them. And I ended up liking and kind of getting both of those decades for those bands that aren't always associated with maybe their better known years. So those were just a good sort of self piece for me to kind of indulge both those bands and get more familiar with their full catalogs.
Okay. Chip, did you get a chance to check out all the roundtables or some of them?
Yeah. I would say The Cure and Manchester both are sort of that. Anybody that's followed along with me and the bands I've been interviewing have been pretty much straight up late 80s, early 90s glam metal. And then sort of in the whatever MTV was playing into the grunge stuff. And so like The Cure was a band that the goth kids in my high school liked that I would never own up to listening to because I didn't want to listen to them. So it was cool to hear sort of, but by the time 2000 rolled around, or probably late 90s, like to this day, maybe someday from the Bloodflowers album is my favorite Cure song.
Really?
Yeah, I may have posted it in Discord. I think I did, maybe not. That song reminds me of Triple Fast Action's "If" and the Cranberries' "Zombie." There's sort of a similar bass line, and like you could kind of play all three, and they all have a sort of a similar, if nothing more than just a similar bass part, maybe. And maybe that's what attracted me to it because I was a huge Triple Fast Action fan, and then I listened to The Cure, and I think I've gone on record to say that if The Cure actually do get around to touring in the U.S., that is one that I actually would go see a stadium show if that's what they end up doing, and I'd even drive to within a 5 or 6 hour drive because I've never seen The Cure, and I feel like that's a band that I actually really would want to see. And so, that was a great roundtable. The Manchester, again, I had a girlfriend in college who was an NME reader and what was the other NME and Melody Maker.
Yeah.
She'd pick up like the import magazines or newspapers, whatever they were from like around town. I don't even remember where she picked them up, but I was like never into that stuff. So coming to it many years later, that was cool to hear about some bands that I didn't know about. And I mentioned this a lot in interviews I do that, I know artists have mixed feelings about Spotify, but the fact that on a roundtable or on any episode, for the most part, the bands you talk about, I can instantly pick up and listen to if I've never heard them, rather than having to track a CD down or go to a record store. So it's cool to be able to hear people talking about a scene or a genre, and then be able to just go and start listening to stuff right away instead of having to track it down. So, like I said, the Manchester one was good too. I was able to go back and listen to some Happy Mondays that I was familiar with, but like not really it wasn't that I wasn't a fan. I just had never listened to much of them.
Right.
Got it. It was nice that our roundtables sort of coincided with some of our reviews. Like we did that Manchester episode just after we reviewed the Black Grape album, which we both gave, I think, better EPs. But then we also did a White Stripes album. We did the first White Stripes album, and that was, this was also the year of doing the garage rock revival. So along with those, I mean, we tackle a lot of records during the year, some of which we're familiar with. Like we've already, we know Faith No More. Like, getting to talk about Angel Dust was cool, but it was not new to us in terms of, and there are a number of bands like that. Like we Fu Manchu and Dishwalla and those sorts of bands. But I would guess it's 75% maybe either we only knew like one song off the record, like with Four Non Blondes, or we didn't know the record at all.
Yeah.
Jay, do you have some picks of what were your favorite discoveries of records that we reviewed?
I sure do. So I broke it into two groups.
Okay.
I've got a group where it's like, I never heard of this band in my life. Never heard a note, probably never even heard of them. And then I've got another group where it's, I've heard of the band, maybe I listened to one of the records, but I never heard the album we reviewed. So in the latter were the new discoveries, first time hearing the band. A couple come to mind. One would be Menthol. Just a really cool sound, big guitars, Smashing Pumpkins, almost type big fuzzy tones, but some really unique, like rhythmic vocals that I find myself like really enjoying because there's some sort of like spontaneity feeling to it, when a singer sings like that. And I think that album just has a couple really standout songs that every time they come on, I just found myself, getting excited and getting into it. Well, Stress is Best and Francis Scott Key are the two that kind of came to mind that really stand out. So that's definitely one record that was a new discovery for me that I keep enjoying. Doughboys is another one, just super solid from start to finish. Melodic rock, kind of like Posies meets Wild Hearts. A little emo mixed in there, maybe too. A little Failure on a song like Disposable. I think Disposable and Fix Me are two of the tracks that I come back to. It's just being really solid. Antenna is another one. Just really unique mix of like Britpop mixed with some kind of like psychedelic and power pop elements. Just cool like genre blending that I think is typical of these bands that don't break. It's usually because they've got, a foot or two in different genres and it just makes it harder to sell. But another really cool band with some big guitar sounds. Easy Listening is a great track. Wallpaper, Don't Be Late. And then shifting over to the stuff that I had heard of the band, I heard the band, just did not hear the album that we listened to, and wasn't a super big, fan of the band, but was really impressed with the records we reviewed. One would be the Gun album, Swagger. Just really catchy, kind of AOR type rock, but with an edge. I thought it really stood up well. It's a lot of fun. Every time it comes on, it just it catches my ear. I'm Mother Earth band we had reviewed, and we did Scenery and Fish, the second record, and just really interesting, like prog alt kind of feel. Really ambitious record, and I think it worked really well. The last one I'll mention is Suicidal Tendencies. We did, what record was it that we reviewed?
Art of Rebellion.
Yes.
And that was a band I was familiar with, but didn't really like, and didn't expect to like the record. And when we reviewed the record, I was blown away. I think I gave it a worthy album, and still, when it comes on, it's super solid. It's just a really well produced album with. I really love the vocal approach on it. It's just it's a cool moment in time, I think, for that band that is probably, I think, even sounds like overlooked by their fans. So, yeah, I found myself becoming a bit of a Suicidal Tendencies fan, which I didn't expect. So those are some that stuck out for me.
Cool. Chip, what about you? Any records out this year that you were like, I've never heard that before? That's pretty cool.
Yeah, similar to Jay, there's albums that I was familiar with that you guys talked about, and there's some bands that like I knew their names but hadn't listened to them. Gun, I think I was tuning into the live stream when you guys were doing that with Phil, and Phil mentioned that that might be up my alley, and he was right. I don't know how I missed it. I do know how I missed it because there wasn't Spotify, right? And they weren't getting written up everywhere that I was reading all the Metal Edge magazines. I was seeing ads for them, but yeah, that totally was in my wheelhouse for that time period. And it's cool to go back and be able to find that stuff now. What else do I have written down? Adorable. Interesting band because I think it was through the podcast that was one of those bands that the college girlfriend liked. And I think it was through the podcast I went out trying to find, I did the Amazon thing and the Discogs thing, and like those albums the CDs are hard to find.
Mm-hmm.
At least they're hard to find at an affordable price. So I did resort to finding them other ways. But it was
You go to the dark web?
Yeah, since Spotify, what is the statute of limitations on this stuff? I have not downloaded albums in a long time because I can't keep up with all the albums.
Hypothetically speaking, use hypothetically speaking before everything you say now.
Yes, hypothetically speaking. Yeah, but like I haven't sought out because everything's available. Everything's available on a streaming service, or you can pick up a cheap CD or something. But Adorable was a band that like you couldn't. So I did end up finding those, and they're the two albums that I got are great. And I think it was thanks to that episode that I went and checked them out. Doughboys, kind of a funny story. Like Jay, the way you described them, sort of a Posies meets Wild Hearts. What's really hard for me to remember. So it's funny. I have the CD case, but I must have never put the CD back in the case. So the CD is probably sitting behind like a Whitesnake CD somewhere.
It's in the trunk of your 1998 or whatever.
Yes. So I bought it. I mean, I bought it used, but around the time it came out. But I think I probably listened to it once or twice and then threw it somewhere. And so I hadn't really thought about it because I keep picking up the cover and it's not there. So that gave me another reason to listen to it. And that was a great album. I was familiar with Menthol just because of the Chicago stuff. I knew Triple Fast Action toured with them a lot. I never actually saw Menthol, I don't think. But I was very familiar just because Wes was roommates with one of the guys, I think. I love the Sleater-Kinney record. I mean, that was one that back in the day I wish more people had heard.
Yeah.
I got to see them live a few times, and just a fascinating band to watch because of Rick Lee, who played literally everything, including the kitchen sink. I actually just interviewed John Schmersel from Brainiac, and he had a band called Enon.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought it was Enon, but it's Enon. And Rick Lee from Sleater-Kinney is in Enon, and he told me that they recently met up for the first time in many years. And I don't know if he said that there's new stuff on the way, but back in the day I didn't realize that there was that. I don't know if I remembered that Rick Lee was in Enon, but yeah, Sleater-Kinney was just such a great band to see live.
That's another one that's not on streaming, or at least I can't find it.
Yeah. I've always been a Matter Rose fan, so I was really glad that you guys talked about Matter Rose. Sean Gardner, who you guys know from Columbus, turned me on to Bedhead in the 90s. So it was cool that you talked about that. And Soul Wax is a band that I have, I think sort of like part of the reason for this whole podcast to start is you guys used to get promo CDs all the time, right, at the radio station. And I have the Soul Wax CD with the promo sticker on it. It was one of those things that I listened to back in the day that I liked when I listened to it, but it's sitting on a shelf and the case hasn't been cracked in 20 years. So it was cool that you guys talked about that and kind of going back and revisiting that one. And I think that's my short list.
Well, I hadn't originally planned to break it into two, but I can do so. So we had talked about Into Another many years ago.
Yeah.
Post-hardcore band are they from New York? New Jersey or something like that. I forgot exactly where they're from. And Vadim and Steve, I think, were on that episode.
Yep.
And it took me a while to crack that record, but once I did, I was like, oh, this is really interesting and this is really cool. And Vadim ended up sending me a copy of the record. I have to send him a record in return as a thank you. I'm trying to figure out what Columbus band I want to send to him. Chip, maybe you can help me figure out. Like, I have to pick one band to represent Columbus and send it to Vadim. Like, do I pull out a Thomas Jefferson Slave Apartments record? Do I go find an RC Mob album? Do I what's it going to be? I would send Pretty Mighty Mighty, but they don't have any vinyl. That would work. I mean, they have like 7 inches and stuff, but none of the albums came out on vinyl as far as I'm aware.
Are you trying to find something to represent, or are you trying to find something that he might like? I think
something that he might like would be good. I want to make it. I don't know. Connections. That band is a good indie rock band. They put out like 5 albums in like 5 years.
Yeah. Evil Queens would be great.
Who?
Evil Queens.
Oh yes, yeah. But did they do anything on? I have a big vinyl box to ship it in. I guess I could just stick like 4 CDs and they would take up the space of a vinyl record. Yes. But I really enjoyed that record. And then along the lines of stuff that we have some familiarity with, obviously Swerve Driver, that was cool to listen to that record again. The Vast record that we talked about, that was one where I like kind of remembered it, but I wasn't sure what it was exactly. And I enjoyed listening to that. And then I actually ended up buying their second album, Music for People. It came up randomly on a record website, like a store they were doing a discount sale on some records, and it was $10. So I was like, oh, I'm going to grab that. I've never even listened to it. I'm going to grab it because I like that first record. As far as the new discoveries, I'm with you guys on the Doughboys. I liked that the Death Ray album, which was just like 30 minutes of like just really sugary indie pop, as well as the adorable record that you mentioned. The Bike record, Taking the Sun, is just this like warm psychedelia, shoegazy indie rock stuff from one of the guys from was it Low Straight Jackets? Is that the name of the band that he had previously been in? That was a really cool record. And
Straight Jacket Fits.
Straight Jacket Fits, not Low Straight Jackets. That's a different. That's
something about Straight Jackets.
I knew there was Straight Jackets in there somewhere. Yeah, and it's weird because there are some albums that we were on EP, right? Yeah. But I really liked that EP, like Little John, like the songs for the EP are great songs.
Mm-hmm.
But I just didn't, it just wasn't the whole record. And that happened a couple times. There was only one stinker this year. We don't need to return to that discussion. But and I also enjoyed, just from the fact that I ignored it completely, the Chris Cornell album. Did not know nothing beyond didn't know anything beyond the first single. And then getting to hear that now and reassess, it still has some issues, but just getting to hear Chris Cornell sing is just like such a treat.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and I'm with you on the Gun record. This was a good year, I think, for us in terms of like some straight up rock and roll with that and the Headstones album. It was nice to hear some some straight up AC/DC influenced hard rock that felt, it didn't have an alternative tag to anywhere in it.
Right. It's good to have the contrast.
Yes. So we're heading into 2023 now. This is the end of our 12th year. 12 years we've been at this, Jay. I mean, it's a long time.
I'm just realizing we started this the year that my daughter was born.
Yes, that's true.
I
think
just
you
realized
missed her birth because we were doing the first episode.
Right. I was talking about a wool record.
Honey, I'm not going to be there. We got to cover this wool record.
Super
very
important.
Yeah, but you need to thank all of our patrons
for sure,
because not only do they provide us with um, the monetary ability to do this, but they also provide us with the emotional uh, lift that we need by being awesome in our Discord and talking about music all day, from all over the world. It's quite fun that we get to talk to people from all over the world, from in Australia and the UK and all parts of the United States and Canada, about music and not just old stuff, but new stuff too. That was what was fun. I know you unfortunately missed it, but when we did the what we were thankful for, it was as much fun to hear about some of the newer stuff that maybe was influenced by 90s music or alternative or grunge or what have you, and hear that in comparison to some of the the newer stuff from 80s and 90s bands that came out this year, which there was a lot. It was, I mean, the box newsletter was busy this year.
Yeah.
There were some weeks where it was like 6 or 7 new releases in a week, and it was multiple weeks of that.
I think there was a backup from the pandemic and bands not being able to tour. So there was a lot of records sort of just waiting, queued up to go. So yeah, it was a big year for albums.
Since we didn't get to ask you on that episode, did you have any favorite new albums that you discovered this year, whether they were Dig Me Out related or not? Was there anything that you have, listened to a lot this year, or you've purchased that you've enjoyed?
Oh my God. There's a ton of stuff.
Putting you on the spot.
We talking 90s related?
I mean, yes and no. We didn't stick completely to the 90s. So
yeah, I mean, obviously the latest Ghost record I wore out to death. I just love that band. They're so much fun. 90s related, I really like the new Cult album, and I know they've been putting out records every 3-5 years ish, and trying to stay active. They've been touring a ton over the years. The records before this, they're okay. This felt like the first time maybe since Beyond Good and Evil where like they made a cohesive album that has like an atmosphere and a sound, and it brings back some of the 80s vibes. Like you hear some of that reverb from the Electric, or sorry, the Love and Sonic Temple era. Doesn't have the big, arena rock hooks that Sonic Temple has, but there's some keyboards on it. It's got a little vibe from that late 80s time for them, but then it also sounds new and modern. So it's not the hookiest album they've ever made, but the sound of it is great, and I respect the hell out of them for continuing to put out new music and like making a record that sounds cohesive. One that I've been enjoying and I never thought I would like, but based on your review for the box, your 1-minute review, I checked it out, was the Dropkick Murphys album with This Machine Still Kills Fascists, all the Woody Guthrie songs. It's really good. It's like really well done. It's a lot of it's kind of amazing when you listen to the songs that I wish they were written now, but they're just a lot of fun, sing along, hooky, amazing lyrics, and they do a great job pulling that stuff off and not making it sound hokey or like old timey. It sounds like modern and full of energy. So those are two that I've been 90s related that I've been enjoying recently.
I know that
Helicopters.
I was going to say the Helicopters and Suede are two other ones that you've enjoyed as well.
The Suede album is amazing. I didn't expect, honestly, I had low expectations for them putting on a new record. It is so good, and Brett Anderson's vocals are maybe better than they've ever been, and the Helicopters is just great to see that band back and playing. And I think the new record is really solid. I don't know that I would put it in their top 3 or 5 for me, but it fits in the catalog, and it's a worthy album for sure. So
one that you liked, Chip, the Stabbing Westward record, I had actually not listened to it until recently, and that's really good. I mean, I was shocked because they were never really a band that I was hugely into, but I really enjoyed listening to that. Not so much the new Smashing Pumpkins record, which was abysmal. I don't know what is going on with that band. They've kind of morphed. It's almost like Billy Corgan is now like the evil twin of Rivers Cuomo. Like they just keep making worse and worse records. I feel like Rivers Cuomo does it out of just just wants to be a relevant pop star or something.
I'm just seeing like Rivers Cuomo's Luke Skywalker and Smashing Pumpkins as like the evil empire.
It is.
Wearing those black skirts and
triple album he's making. 3 records. And it's so disappointing. It's like Jimmy Chamberlain doesn't exist anymore. Like, I don't know why he's in the band, because you could just have a drum machine playing everything for the most part. Anyway, I don't want to derail this end of the year episode. But like I said, we of course thank all of our patrons. If you want to become a patron, digmeoutunion.com, dmounion.com. And all these records come from either our union members or they come from our website when people suggest them by just going to digmeoutpodcast.com and putting an album in our suggest an album form. And then that gets voted on at our website. So, or at Patreon. So if you want to do that, if you want to be a part of the voting, join Patreon, or you can be a part of the suggestion process. Because I would guess, like looking back at what we enjoyed, there was stuff that Adorable won a poll. That's how we ended up listening to it. It wasn't a suggestion by one of our listeners. The Doughboys also wasn't that was a poll winner.
Yes.
So it's always interesting where these things are going to come from, especially when these polls are all over the place. You don't know who's going to win. We're often wrong when we predict who's going to win. We're not Steve Kornacki. We are we're on the opposite end of that. So
just a couple knuckleheads.
Any other final thoughts? Final thoughts on 2022. Are you happy it's over? Ready to move on to 2023?
Sure, why not? No, it's amazing that people still listen to us yammer on. And every year we're trying to do whatever we can to make not just the show better, but try to, have a community here where people that want to talk about music have a place to go. If you don't want to go on some Facebook group or you don't even know where to look, we're trying to build a community where everybody can share an opinion and, they're all valid and nobody's right or wrong because it's music. I mean, there's no
right.
Music's all subjective. There's no good. I don't believe that there's any good or bad music. It's you either enjoy it or you don't. And we have a community that I can't believe totally we found people that just get that, which is incredible. So I'm just super thankful to have that. And I'm looking forward to do more stuff with it as we go into next year.
Yes. Chip, any last words? You ready for 2023 for some interviews?
Absolutely. I think Jay mentioned it. This whole backlog of stuff. I thought 2022 was an amazing year of music. There are albums that in January and February I said are going to be on the top 5 albums I listened to this year that I didn't listen to after March and that I totally forgot about. And so I think that we still have this backlog of stuff that people have been working on the last couple of years that I envision the next couple of years to be equally as fruitful when it comes to releases. I'll put in a real quick plug. One album that I've heard that is 90s related that is coming out in January or February is the new Church record that I've been privy to a preview of. Like a lot of the bands that you mentioned, like a lot of the bands that I've mentioned, a band that my college roommates listened to a lot to the point that like annoyingly so. At the time that I was trying to listen to Soundgarden, they were listening to the Church and I just didn't
Right.
get it. But the new album the new album sounds great, and so I'm interested in diving deeper into it. And not for Dig Me Out, because we're probably not going to talk 90s, but I think I am going to be talking to somebody from the band at some point.
Cool.
But yeah, also, I got one more thing. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Going back to the whole idea of community. I mean, it's awesome to be able to hop online and, as some of these other sites, some of these other social media sites maybe are ones that I'm trying to spend less time on and get away from. I keep looking for like what is going to be my replacement for maybe the Bird site. And I realize that, anybody that knows me knows that I just like to talk about music. And so I don't really need all these things throwing out into the wide world when I have a group of people who we can all talk about music together. Even to the point, I know you guys, have you guys met anybody that you didn't know in person before?
What do you mean?
Well, so I mean, I knew Patrick Testa from college,
right.
But through a friend of a roommate, kind of a, 3 connections later. But it's been awesome to reconnect with them both on the Discord group, but I, hung out with them at the Royal Crescent Mob show. So it's just kind of cool to be able to kind of take some of these online relationships and explore them in real life. I know that in the Discord group, a couple of people met up in New York, and so it's an online community, but it turns into like real life relationships, which is awesome.
Right. Well, yeah, I when Steve's band was touring Hollow Earth, I went to see him at the Big Room Bar.
Yeah.
And I was out of my element because
Yes.
all those bands were very, very loud and heavy. And while I like some heavy bands, they were to the heavier end of the heavy end of heavy, to put it that way. But Hollow Earth was amazing. Steve was great. And he's not part of our Discord community, but Eric Grubbs, who was on the show a bunch of times down in Dallas, we met up and went record shopping one time when I was down there on business.
Oh, wow.
I had like 2 hours to kill, so we hooked up at one of the nearby record stores and just walked around and chatted and that kind of stuff. And so
we have bantered about maybe doing an annual Dig Me Out summit.
A summit.
The catch is Cal Bittner has to cook, but
oh yeah,
like a convention of sorts. Maybe we get some bands or something. I don't know.
Who's planning that? It sounds like work.
I know.
You mentioned about next year. I was looking at the release calendar. Like already you've got Yola Tango's got a new album coming out. Of course, there's Guided by Voices. They already have a new album. They had 3 albums this year. There's another one already scheduled for January. New albums from Quasi, who haven't done a record in like 10 years. Orbital's got a new record coming out. Alan Apley from Shiner and The Life and Times. He's got a solo album coming out, which I've actually already pre-ordered that.
Again, I have an interview for somebody other than Dig Me Out, but I talked to Alan 2 weeks ago, that interview will be dropping early January on bigtakeover.com.
Excellent. So yeah, 2023 is going to be just as busy with new stuff in the early months and then throughout the year. And then we're going to obviously be busy because we already have our first review scheduled for 2023. And we'll be getting to more of those from our patrons, and the polls will be going. I think we got one going right now that we'll be doing in January. And then of course our first roundtable, we did albums of 1992 last year because it was 2002. This year will be 1993. It'll be 30 years since 1993. 30.
When are we going to loop back around and have already done the albums of episodes?
We're close. Like It's either 94 or 95.
Okay.
I mean, that does make me like, that seems like a long time ago, but 93 is the year I graduated college. Yikes. 30 years. Ooh.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like maturity wise, I have not matured much farther than 1993, but
right.
But my hairline and my coloring is definitely grayer and thinner. All right. Last things before we wrap up this year. We have a newsletter. We've mentioned it. You can go to digmeoutpodcast.com to sign up. It's the box newsletter. And reviews of new releases, plus our release calendar, where you can catch up on all the things that are coming out. And then lastly, Apple Podcasts. for your positive feedback on this show. Chip, thank you for coming on with us. Look forward to more interviews. Yeah, let's get the champagne out and rock out the new year at a reasonable time. I'm old and I don't want to stay up till midnight. There should be for older people like us, there should be a special 10 o'clock ball drop. Like, you can go to bed now. You know what's going to happen. But here's a ball drop for you just for fun. So you can have your toast and then put on your sleep mask and put in your mouth guard and turn on your noise machine and all the other things you need to do to fall asleep. You ready to do another year, Jay?
Let's do it.
All right. For Jay, I'm Tim. We're out. We'll be back next year with another episode of Dig Me Out.